Vivian Locke set down her champagne, peeled the white glove from her right hand, one slow finger at a time, and flicked it across Eli Grant's chest like she was brushing off lint. "Sweetheart," she said, smiling for the 200 guests, "the help enters through the kitchen. Did nobody teach you that? Or do they not explain things twice to a black man your age?" The room laughed. Somebody clapped. She stepped closer, lowered her voice just enough to be cruel and loud enough to be heard. "Look at those hands. You've been carrying other people's trays your whole life, haven't you? And now you want to stand at my table like you belong." She tilted her head. "Bless your heart. Go home before you embarrass yourself." A man in a tuxedo called out, "Somebody check his pockets before he leaves." And the laughter swelled again, warm and ugly, rolling over the old man, like he wasn't even a person standing there. Eli Grant, 71 years old, in a valet's vest, 2 shades too faded for a room this rich, did not laugh. He did not lower his eyes. He raised one trembling hand instead, and in it, a single photograph creased soft at the corners from 6 years of being carried. He looked past the bride. He looked at the billionaire about to marry her. "Charles," he said quietly, "if you marry her tonight, you'll lose everything." Then he turned the photo around. And Vivian Locke, radiant, untouchable, the most beautiful woman in the room, went white as the orchids behind her. Before this night is over, every single person who laughed at this old man will wish to God they had looked at that photo sooner. Stay with me, because what's in that picture changes everything, and you will not see the last twist coming. Before we go on, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right where you are. I read every single one. And if you believe the truth always finds its way to the light, do me one favor. Subscribe and walk this whole story with me to the end. 5 hours before the champagne hit, Eli Grant's face, the Whitfield estate, sat quiet under a pale October sky. 9 acres of clipped lawn rolled down to the water in Newport, Rhode Island, ending at a private dock where a 42-foot yacht rocked in the swells. Stone walls, copper gutters gone green with salt and time. This was the kind of coast where the silence itself felt expensive, where the wind off the bay smelled like money that had been sitting still for 100 years. Charles Whitfield had not been born into any of it. He'd bought his first property at 26, a roadside motel off Route 1, with a leaking roof and a neon sign missing 3 letters. He fixed it himself on his knees with borrowed tools. Then he bought another. Then a third. 40 years later, the Whitfield Group owned hotels in 9 states and a real estate portfolio worth $1.8 billion. And Charles Whitfield was the man who'd built every inch of it with calloused hands and a stubbornness that bordered on cruelty toward himself. But money could not buy back his wife. Margaret had died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer 11 weeks from diagnosis to the funeral. Charles had sat at her bedside through every one of those nights, and when she was gone, the estate that had once felt like a kingdom became a museum he wandered alone. He stopped going to the office. He stopped sailing. Some mornings the staff found him at the breakfast table at noon, coffee cold, staring at the empty chair across from him. Then 8 months ago, he met Vivian Locke at a charity gala in Manhattan. She was 37, luminous, the kind of woman who made a crowded room feel like it had been arranged just for her. She ran a small art gallery in Chelsea, or said she did. She donated generously to children's hospitals, always with a photographer nearby. She laughed at Charles's jokes and asked about Margaret with such tenderness that the old man, who had not cried in front of anyone in 3 years, cried in front of her. Within 4 months, she had moved into the estate. Within 8, there was a ring. Tonight, the south lawn had been transformed. A glass-walled marquee tent stretched 200 feet across the grass, strung with 10,000 warm lights. A 9-piece orchestra tuned near the fountain. Towers of white orchids. Vivian's only request, repeated until the florists wept, rose from every table. 200 guests in tuxedos and gowns drifted across imported marble laid right over the lawn. It was by every measure a perfect night. Daniel Whitfield did not think so. Charles's son stood near the bar with a glass of bourbon he wasn't drinking, watching the woman about to become his stepmother work the crowd. Daniel was 34, sharp-jawed, a partner at a venture firm in Boston, and he had inherited exactly one thing from his father, an instinct for when a deal was too good to be real. And Vivian Locke was too good to be real. 8 months. His father had known this woman for 8 months, and now half of everything Margaret had helped build was being folded into a trust with a stranger's name on it. Daniel had said so gently 6 weeks ago. Charles had not spoken to him for 9 days afterward. "She makes him happy," Daniel's wife had said on the drive up. "Maybe that's enough." "Maybe," Daniel had answered. But he'd hired a private investigator the next morning anyway. Across the lawn behind the hedges where the gravel service road curved out of sight of the main house, a catering van pulled up to the kitchen entrance at 2 in the afternoon. The staff filed out in their pressed white shirts and black vests. Dishwashers runners, 2 bartenders, a pastry assistant. And stepping down last slow and careful on the gravel, an old man. He was tall even now, even with the slight forward curve that 71 years puts in a spine. Lean. His hands were large and steady. His eyes, and this was the thing the catering manager would never notice, because she would never look his eyes moved across that estate the way a man reads a room he has read 10,000 times before. Corners. Exits. Faces. Eli Grant had spent 30 years photographing crime scenes for the police. He had stood over 4,000 bodies and learned to see what other people walked right past. He saw it now, without trying the security detail's blind spot near the East Terrace, the camera angle that missed the dock the way the whole beautiful evening was arranged to keep the staff invisible and the guests adored. In his vest pocket, folded twice, was a photograph he had carried for 6 years. He had not come here to serve champagne. He had come for the bride. "You old-timer." Rosa Delgado, the catering manager, snapped her fingers at him from the kitchen door. "You're on water and coat check. You don't talk to guests. You don't make eye contact unless they speak to you first. Understand, tonight you're furniture. Expensive furniture that knows how to disappear." "Yes, ma'am," Eli said softly. He had been invisible his whole life. He knew how to use it. He carried the first tray of sparkling water out across the lawn as the orchestra began to play, weaving between people who looked straight through him. And he was nearly back to the kitchen when Vivian Locke stepped out onto the East Terrace to greet her arriving guests. The setting sun caught the brooch pinned at her chest. Sapphire and diamond antique, unmistakable. And Eli Grant stopped walking, his tray tilted. Water trembled in the glasses. For one long second, the old man could not breathe, could not move, could only stare at a piece of jewelry he had last seen in a 6-year-old photograph carried in his pocket, a brooch reported stolen the night a man died. His hands began to shake. The woman the world called Vivian Locke had been born Diane Royce in a trailer outside Bakersfield, and she had buried that name so many times she sometimes forgot it had ever been real. There had been others since. Diane Calloway in Phoenix. Vivian Marsh in Atlanta. Each name belonged to a marriage, and each marriage belonged to a wealthy man, and each wealthy man was dead. The pattern never varied because the pattern worked. She found them lonely. Widowers, mostly men who had built empires, and lost the only person they'd built them for. She did not chase their money. She chased their grief because grief was the door, and once a man let you in to share it, he would let you in everywhere. She listened. She remembered the dead wife's birthday. She cried at the right graves. And when the trust documents were signed and the wills rewritten, the husbands began very gradually to have heart trouble. The first had been a real estate developer in Scottsdale. The coroner wrote cardiac arrest. The second, a shipping magnate named Arthur Bishop in Hartford, Connecticut, 6 years ago now. Arthur had given her the sapphire brooch the week before he died. It had belonged to his late mother, Eleanor. To Eleanor, 1971. The engraving on the back read, "And Diane had loved it the way she loved all stolen things completely and without guilt." After Arthur's funeral, the brooch was reported missing from the estate. So was a great deal of Arthur's fortune. Neither was ever recovered because both had walked out the front door on the woman who killed him. Tonight, she was wearing the brooch to her own wedding. It amused her. Vanity had always been the one thing she could not fully control, and she had decided long ago, that a woman this careful deserved one indulgence. Charles Whitfield was the biggest prize of her life. $1.8 billion a yacht, 9 states. And at midnight tonight, 3 hours after the ceremony by design, Charles would sign the consolidated marital trust his lawyers had drafted, merging his entire estate into a single instrument with both their names on it. After that, the law would call her his partner in everything. After that, all it would take was time and a little chemistry and the patience she had perfected over 15 years. The wedding had to happen tonight. That was the only rule that mattered. In a private dressing suite on the 2nd floor of the main house, Vivian fastened a diamond earring and watched a man's reflection appear behind her in the mirror. "You're wearing the brooch," Gregory Vance said. He was 39, smooth, expensively dressed, and to every guest downstairs he was Vivian's younger brother, the protective sibling, who also happened to be her personal attorney. The story held up because nobody ever checked. Family was the one credential the rich never questioned in each other. He was not her brother. "It's mine," she said. "I'll wear what I want." Gregory crossed the room and put his hands on her bare shoulders, and the look that passed between them in the mirror was not the look of siblings. It was older than that and colder. "6 years we've been careful," he murmured against her ear. "Don't get sentimental at the finish line, Dee. Don't call me that." She turned in his arms. "Not tonight. Not ever again if this goes right." She straightened his tie with the same care she gave everything she manipulated. "After midnight, we don't have to be careful anymore. We just have to be patient." He kissed her once, slow. "And the son Daniel's been asking questions. Daniel's a boy with a hunch and no proof." She smiled. "By the time he finds anything, his father will have been dead 2 years and I'll be in Portugal." Downstairs, she had 200 witnesses who adored her, a billionaire who worshipped her, and a wedding 3 hours from the only signature that mattered. She had never in 15 years felt this close to being finished. What Vivian Locke did not know, could not have known, was that the catering van that had pulled up to the service entrance that afternoon carried among its dishwashers and runners an old black man in a borrowed vest who had spent 6 years and most of his pension hunting one woman across 4 states. She did not know his name was Eli Grant. She did not know whose father he was. And she did not know that the brooch she had chosen to wear tonight out of vanity, out of the one weakness she could never quite kill, was the single piece of evidence on earth that could connect Vivian Locke to a dead man in Hartford and a boy who had died in prison for a crime he did not commit. Out on the lawn, Eli set down his tray of water glasses with hands that had finally stopped shaking. He had seen the brooch. He had heard her laugh carry across the terrace, that laugh the one Marcus had described in his letter, low and warm and fake, dead like a song somebody learned but never felt. It was her. After 6 years, he was standing 40 feet from her. He pressed his palm flat against his vest pocket where the photograph waited, and he said 3 words under his breath that no one else could hear over the orchestra. "I found her." Then a hand closed hard around his arm. "What did I tell you?" Rosa Delgado's fingers dug into his elbow. "Furniture doesn't stand in the middle of the lawn staring at the bride. Move!" "I'm sorry, ma'am." Eli let her steer him back toward the kitchen. "Lost my footing." "Lose it on your own time." She released him at the service door. "Water and coats, that's it." Eli nodded and disappeared inside, which was the one thing he was very good at. But he did not stay in the kitchen. He waited until Rosa swept off to scream at a bartender, then he picked up a fresh tray and walked it straight back out, not to the lawn this time, but to the head table near the fireplace where Charles Whitfield's place card sat in gold script, and Vivian Locke's seat waited beside it. He moved like a man who had spent his life being unseen because he had. 30 years carrying a camera into the worst rooms in the state had taught Eli Grant a particular skill: how to be present and invisible at once. How to observe everything while appearing to notice nothing. He set water glasses down one at a time, slow, working his way toward the head of the table, and as he did, he watched. Vivian had come down from the house. She stood 10 feet away holding court, touching a senator's wife on the arm, tipping her head back to laugh. And up close, Eli saw all of it. The brooch, yes. To Eleanor, 1971 he knew was engraved on the back of it, because Marcus's photograph had caught the clasp turned outward. But he saw more than the brooch. He saw the small dark mole below her left ear that no amount of money had erased. He saw the way she touched the hollow of her own throat when she lied. Marcus had written about that too in the letter. She does this thing with her hand when the story gets thick. He heard the laugh again, close now, and it landed in his chest like a fist. 6 years he had studied a stranger. Now the stranger was real and breathing, and standing close enough to touch, wearing a dead woman's brooch to her own wedding. It was her. There was no doubt left in him at all. For 1 second, the old grief rose up so hard he had to grip the edge of the table. He thought of Marcus, 29 years old. A driver and a bodyguard for Arthur Bishop. The one steady job he'd ever held, proud of the uniform, proud of the paycheck he sent home. And then Arthur was dead, and the brooch was missing, and somebody needed a name to pin both on, and the easiest name in that house, the only black face on Arthur Bishop's payroll, was Marcus Grant's. They'd called it theft, then negligence, then manslaughter when the cause of death got murky. The trial lasted 4 days. Marcus's public defender met him twice. He went to prison swearing he was innocent, and 14 months later he died there, in what the report called an altercation, which was a word people used when they had decided in advance not to look. But Marcus had mailed his father something before he died. A photograph, and a letter that began, "Dad, if anything happens to me, find the woman in this picture." Eli's hand crept to his vest pocket. The photo was still there, folded twice. "I found her son," he thought. "I finally found her." "You!" A guest's voice, sharp behind him. A man in his 50s with a glass of scotch eyeing Eli the way you'd eye a stain. "Are you serving water? Or are you sleeping standing up? Christ, they'll hire anybody off the curb these days. Look at him." The woman beside him laughed. "Probably can't even hear you, honey." "I hear you fine, sir," Eli said quietly, and filled the man's glass without spilling a drop, and the steadiness of his own hands surprised him. "Anything else?" The man waved him off like a fly. Rosa was crossing the lawn toward him again, her face already tightening. Eli set down the last glass. He had only seconds. He took one final look at Vivian Locke, at the brooch, the mole, the lying hand at her throat, and he committed it all to memory, the way he had committed 4,000 crime scenes to memory, because evidence was the only language he had ever fully trusted. Then he slipped back through the service door before Rosa could reach him, stepped into the empty pantry hallway, leaned his back against the cold wall, and finally let himself breathe. He drew the photograph from his pocket, unfolded it with the care of a man handling something holy. In the dim hall light, he looked at it, at the figure of the woman beside Arthur Bishop's body, at the small lab vial in her hand, at the brooch on her chest catching the camera's flash, and at something he had spent 6 years almost not noticing, because his eyes always went straight to her. A man, blurred, half-turned, standing in the doorway behind her. A man Eli had never been able to identify. A man whose face had been too soft, too smudged, just a shape in the dark of a 6-year-old photograph. Until tonight. Because Eli had seen that man walk across this very lawn an hour ago in a tuxedo, shaking hands, being introduced to the guests as the bride's devoted younger brother. Eli's blood went cold. "2 of you," he whispered to the empty hall. "There were always 2 of you." Down the corridor, a door opened. Footsteps, and a smooth, unhurried voice that Eli had last heard introducing itself to a state senator said, "And who exactly are you?" Gregory Vance stood at the end of the hallway, one hand in his pocket, watching the old man with the photograph. Eli folded it shut too fast. "Just catching my breath, sir," he said. "Long night for old legs." "I'm sure." Gregory walked closer, slow, unbothered, the way a man walks, when he has never once in his life been afraid of the person in front of him. "What's that in your hand?" "And so? Coat ticket. Dropped one." Gregory stopped 3 feet away. His eyes moved over Eli, the faded vest, the gray at his temples, the steadiness that didn't quite match a man who claimed to be just catching his breath. "You were staring at my sister out there. The water service. People noticed." "Didn't mean any disrespect." "No, I'm sure you didn't." Gregory smiled, and it never touched his eyes. "Let me give you some advice. Friend one man to another. There are 200 very important people on that lawn tonight. The kind of people who can make a phone call and end a man's whole livelihood before he's finished his shift. You understand what I'm telling you?" "I think I do." "Good. Then you'll understand this, too." Gregory leaned in, dropping his voice to something almost gentle. "Nobody out there is going to believe a word that comes out of an old black valet's mouth over the bride at a Whitfield wedding. Nobody. So whatever you think you saw, you didn't. Go check coats." He held Eli's gaze 1 beat too long, then turned and walked back toward the noise of the party. Eli stood very still in the cold hallway and let the fear come, and then let it pass. Because Gregory Vance had made one mistake. He had assumed the old man in front of him was nobody. What Gregory could not have known, what Vivian could not have known, what not one person on that lawn could have known was that for 30 years Eli Grant had carried a camera into the worst rooms the state of Connecticut had to offer. Murder scenes, overdoses, fires. He had photographed 4,000 of them, and in courtrooms across 3 counties, prosecutors had put his name on the witness stand and asked him to explain what the pictures proved. He knew how light fell on a body. He knew how to read the time of day from the length of a shadow. He knew that a digital photograph carried hidden data inside it, the date, the hour, the very camera that took it, and that this data could not be faked by a frightened 29-year-old driver with a cheap phone and 40 seconds to live. He had not spent 6 years simply finding Vivian Locke. He had spent 6 years building a case. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had developed film in the dark for 3 decades, that had held a Nikon over more dead men than he could count, that now carried trays of champagne for people who looked straight through him. Calloused, spotted, old, but not done. "You think I'm nobody," he said quietly to the empty hall. "That's the same mistake they made with my son." He drew the photo out one more time and unfolded it, and this time he did not look at the woman. He looked at the man in the doorway behind her. The blurred shape he had never been able to name in 6 years of staring. He held the photo up to the dim hallway light and turned it the way he'd turned 10,000 prints under a dark-room bulb reading shadow and angle and the set of a half-seen shoulder. The build. The tilt of the head. The way the man stood with one hand in his pocket, perfectly at ease in a room with a corpse in it, the same way Gregory Vance had stood 3 feet away from him not 60 seconds ago. Eli's breath stopped in his chest. For 6 years, he had believed he was hunting one killer, one woman who slipped poison into rich men's hearts and walked away with their fortunes. He had built the whole case around her, the names, the marriages, the deaths, the brooch. But the blurred man in the doorway had always been there in the corner of every nightmare just out of focus. And now the focus had snapped clean. There were 2 of them. There had always been 2 of them. The woman who married the men, and the man who played her brother, her lawyer, her cover, who stood in the room when the husbands died, and signed the documents that made it all legal afterward. Marcus hadn't just photographed a murderer. He had photographed both of them. He had caught the entire machine in a single frame, and he had died for it, and neither of them had ever known the picture survived. Eli's hands were shaking again, but not from fear now. From something closer to grief, and closer still, to rage. He thought of his son's letter. "Find the woman in this picture, Dad." Marcus had said the woman. Marcus dying had only had time to name the one he understood. But the old man holding the photograph in a cold hallway understood the rest, now the part his son never lived to see. Down the corridor, this orchestra swelled into something grand and triumphant. Through the kitchen windows, Eli could see the guests beginning to drift toward the marquee tent, toward the rows of white chairs, toward the altar of orchids where Charles Whitfield would, in a matter of minutes, marry the woman who killed Arthur Bishop, and blamed it on Marcus Grant. Eli folded the photograph and pressed it flat against his heart. "Not tonight," he whispered. "You don't get to win again tonight." Then a kitchen door banged open behind him, and Rosa Delgado's voice cracked across the hallway like a whip. "There you are! The ceremony's starting. I need you on the floor in 30 seconds, or you're done, you hear me? Done!" Eli turned toward the lights, toward the music, toward 200 people who would not believe him. And he started walking. To understand the photograph, you have to go back 6 years to a cold night in a stone house outside Hartford. Arthur Bishop was 66 years old and worth $400 million when he married the woman he knew as Vivian Marsh. He had been a widower for 2 years. His mother, Eleanor, had left him a sapphire and diamond brooch he kept in a velvet box, and in the 2nd month of the marriage, he gave it to his new wife, because she reminded him, he said, of everything tender he had lost. Marcus Grant was Arthur's driver. He'd gotten the job through a security agency 18 months earlier, 27 years old, steady, polite, the first real foothold he'd ever had. He drove Arthur to meetings. He stood by the car in the rain. He sent half his paycheck home to his father in Providence and called every Sunday. Marcus noticed things. He'd inherited that from Eli without ever knowing it. He noticed that Mr. Bishop, a man who'd never been sick a day, suddenly tired easily. He noticed the new wife dismissed the regular nurse. He noticed the younger man, the one she called her brother, who came and went through the back, who was never around when guests visited. And on the night Arthur Bishop died, Marcus noticed the light on in the study at 2 a.m. when he came to lock the cars. He looked through this window, and he did the thing his father had done for 30 years without ever teaching him to do it. He raised his phone and he took a picture. The flash didn't fire, or if it did, no one inside turned. The photograph caught a woman bent over Arthur Bishop's slumped body, a small glass vial in her gloved hand, the brooch glinting on her chest. And in the doorway behind her, half turned a man with one hand in his pocket, watching. Marcus didn't fully understand what he'd seen, but he understood enough to be afraid. 4 days later, Arthur Bishop was declared dead of heart failure. The brooch was reported stolen, and the police, looking for the easiest hand to put it in, arrested the driver, the one man on the estate who didn't belong to that world, the one face that made a jury nod before a single word of testimony. Marcus mailed the photograph to his father the day before his arrest with a letter. "Dad, if anything happens to me, find the woman in this picture. I think she did something to Mr. Bishop. Nobody here will listen to me. I love you. Tell them I didn't take anything. He was convicted in 4 days. He died in 14 months. An altercation, the report said." Eli Grant buried his son with a photograph in his pocket and a promise on his lips. And then he went to work the only way he knew how, like a man building a case. He pulled Arthur Bishop's death records. He found the missing brooch in the police inventory to Eleanor. 1971 never recovered. He tracked the woman backward through a paper trail of name changes and dead husbands. Vivian Marsh in Hartford, Diane Calloway in Phoenix, a developer in Scottsdale dead of cardiac arrest. 3 marriages, 3 fortunes, 3 graves. It took 6 years and most of his pension. He sold his car. He let his apartment shrink to a single room. He learned to track a ghost across 4 states using public records gallery mailing lists and the society pages because women like her always needed to be admired. And 9 weeks ago, in a Newport newspaper, he found her again engaged to Charles Whitfield, billionaire, photographed at a hospital gala in a sapphire brooch, the caption described as a treasured family heirloom. Eli had recognized it from across the years. Now in the cold pantry hallway, minutes before the ceremony, he opened the leather folder he'd hidden inside his vest that morning, and he checked it one last time, the way he'd checked evidence packets 1,000 times before. The original photograph. An enlargement of the brooch from the photo side by side with the newspaper clipping. Same stones, same setting, same flaw in the lower facet. Arthur Bishop's death certificate. The stolen property report. A timeline typed clean of 3 marriages and 3 deaths. And Marcus's letter in his son's own careful hand. It was not a perfect case. He was not a detective. He had no badge, no lab, no warrant. But he had spent 30 years teaching juries how to see, and tonight he had 200 witnesses, a projector for the wedding slideshow, and a woman foolish enough to wear the murder weapon to her own wedding. It was enough. It had to be enough. He thought of the laughter that would meet him, the hands that would grab his arms. An old black valet. Nobody will believe you. Gregory's voice certain in the hall. Maybe they wouldn't believe him, but they would see the photograph. And once a thing is seen, it cannot be unseen. Eli untied his apron and folded it over a chair. He slid the leather folder under his arm. He smoothed the front of his faded vest with both hands, the way a man straightens up before something that matters. Through the doorway, the orchestra fell quiet. A voice, the officiant, began to speak. "Dearly beloved." "This is it, son," Eli whispered. "Tonight they hear you." And Eli Grant walked out of the kitchen into the light toward the front of the tent, where Charles Whitfield stood waiting to marry a murderer. The officiant had just said the words, "If anyone here knows any reason these 2 should not be joined the old line," the one nobody ever expects to mean anything, when an old man in a faded valet's vest walked up the center aisle. "I do," Eli Grant said. "I know a reason." 200 heads turned. The orchestra conductor froze with his baton in the air. Somewhere near the back, a glass shattered on the marble. Charles Whitfield stared down the aisle, confused. Beside him, in a column of white silk, Vivian Locke went very still. "Charles," Eli said, walking steady, the leather folder under his arm. If you marry her tonight, you'll lose everything. Your money, your name. And then if she's patient, and she is very patient, you'll lose your life. The tent erupted. Who let him in here? Rosa Delgado's voice shrill from the side. Security, security. A guard caught Eli's arm. Then a second. But Eli did not stop talking, and his voice, low, calm, certain, carried over the noise the way only a truly unafraid voice can. Her name isn't Vivian Locke, he said. 6 years ago in Hartford, she was Vivian Marsh, married to a man named Arthur Bishop. Before that, Diane Calloway in Phoenix. Before that, a developer in Scottsdale. He looked at Charles, not the crowd. 3 husbands, Mr. Whitfield. 3 fortunes. 3 graves. And you're meant to be the 4th. For one heartbeat, the tent held its breath. Then Vivian laughed. It was a beautiful laugh, warm and broken-sounding, exactly the right amount of bewildered. She pressed a hand to her chest, to the brooch, though no one but Eli noticed, and her eyes filled instantly perfectly with tears. "Charles," she said, her voice trembling, turning to him. "I have never seen this man before in my life. I don't even understand what's happening." She let one tear fall. "This is supposed to be the happiest night of my life, and a stranger is calling me a murderer in front of everyone we love." It was a masterpiece. Eli watched it land. He watched the crowd's sympathy swing toward her like iron toward a magnet, the radiant bride in tears, the ranting old man in security's grip. He saw the faces around him harden against him, one by one. "This is disgusting," a woman in emerald hissed. "He's clearly unwell." "Some kind of stalker," a man agreed. "Get him out before he hurts her." Gregory Vance materialized from the front row, smooth and grave, sliding a protective arm around Vivian's shoulders. "It's all right," he said to the crowd, projecting calm. "It's all right, everyone. My sister has dealt with disturbed individuals before, comes with charity work, sadly. Officers, please, gently. He's an old man. Brother." Eli looked at the arm around her shoulders, at the man from the doorway in the photograph, at the whole machine, working right in front of 200 people who could not see it. The guards began to pull him backward. "Charles," Eli said. And now there was something raw under the calm. Something a father's voice does when it's running out of time. 6 years ago, a young man died for what she did. A driver, 29 years old. They put it on him because he was the easiest man in the room to blame. And you are looking at the easiest man in this room to dismiss, which is exactly why she thought she'd never get caught. His eyes burned. "I am asking you for 60 seconds, that's all. 60 seconds and 1 photograph." "Get him out!" Vivian sobbed. The guards hauled him another step, and then a voice cut across the entire tent, sharp used to being obeyed, the voice of a man who had spent 40 years deciding which deals were real. "Stop!" Daniel Whitfield stepped out of the second row. He was not looking at the old man. He was looking at his father, and then at Vivian, and then at the smooth, grave man with his arm around her. The brother Daniel had spent 2 months and a great deal of money quietly investigating. "Dad," Daniel said. "Let him talk." "Daniel," Vivian started. 60 seconds, Daniel said to the guards, to the room, to no one who could overrule him. "If he's crazy, we throw him out and laugh about it at brunch. But you're going to give an old man 60 seconds in front of all these witnesses, or I'm going to wonder for the rest of my life why nobody would." The guards hesitated. They looked at Charles. And Charles Whitfield, billionaire groom, a man who had not made a poor read on a person in 40 years until 8 months ago, looked at the tears on his bride's face, and then at the strange, terrible steadiness in the old valet's eyes, and felt for the first time all night a thread of cold doubt slide into his chest. 60 seconds, Charles said quietly. The guards let go. Eli Grant straightened his vest. He walked unhurried to the side of the altar where the wedding slideshow had been cued to play during the reception. Charles and Vivian. A love story, the screen read 12 feet tall behind the orchids. He pulled a small drive from his folder and handed it to the stunned AV technician. "Put this up," he said. "Just the first image." Vivian's tears stopped. For half a second only, but Eli was watching. Eli had spent 30 years watching something flickered behind her beautiful face that had nothing to do with grief. It was fear. The technician's hands moved. The screen went dark. 200 people leaned forward in the candlelight. And the photograph Marcus Grant had died to take 6 years ago in a stone house outside Hartford bloomed 12 feet tall above the wedding altar. The image filled the screen, and the tent went silent in a way that 200 people in formal wear are almost never silent. A dim study. A man slumped in a leather chair, older gray, unmistakably dead, in the way the body folds when life has already left it. A woman bent over him in a dark dress, one gloved hand holding a small glass vial, and on her chest catching the camera's light, a sapphire and diamond brooch. For a long moment, nobody breathed. Then a woman near the front said slowly, That looks like..." And her eyes went from the screen to the bride and back. Because the woman in the 6-year-old photograph and the woman in the white gown were beyond any argument the same. "This was taken the night Arthur Bishop died," Eli said into the silence. His voice did not rise. It didn't need to. "Hartford, Connecticut. 6 years ago. The man in that chair was 66 years old and worth $400 million, and the coroner called it heart failure." He pointed not at the woman in the photo, but at her chest. "That brooch was reported stolen from his estate the next morning. Never recovered." He turned and looked directly at Vivian Locke, standing frozen at the altar. "It's pinned to your dress right now." Every head in the tent swung toward the bride. The candlelight caught the sapphires. "To Eleanor, 1971. 100 phones came up. "That's a lie," Vivian said, and her voice had changed just slightly, just enough the trembling bride's softness gone thin. "Photographs can be faked. Anyone can." "They can." Eli agreed. "And for 30 years it was my job to know the difference." He let that land. "My name is Eli Grant. For 3 decades I was a forensic photographer for the police. I have stood in a witness box more times than I can count and explained to a jury what a picture proves and what it doesn't. So let me tell you what this one proves." He stepped toward the screen. A digital photograph carries data inside it that the eye can't see: the date, the hour down to the second, the hour, the make and model of the device that captured it. That data was logged the night it was taken, and it has never been altered, because the man who took this picture didn't live long enough to alter anything. He pointed to the shadows in the image. "Look at the light. One source low from that desk lamp. Look at how it falls across her face, and the body consistent single angle, no second exposure laid over it. This was not built in a computer. This is one frame, one moment real." His voice dropped. "I have shown juries 1,000 photographs. I would stake my life this one is true. I nearly have." A murmur moved through the crowd, and it was no longer moving toward the bride. It was a guest who broke it open, a silver-haired woman from the New York art world, squinting at the screen. "Eleanor Bishop," she said. "That brooch. I knew Eleanor. That's Eleanor Bishop's brooch. It went missing. There was a whole... Arthur was a client of the gallery. She put a hand over her mouth. And then a younger man near the side, who had been staring not at the woman in the photo, but at the blurred figure behind her in the doorway, said the thing Eli had been waiting 6 years for someone other than himself to see. "Wait," he pointed. The guy in the back. The guy in the doorway. His arm swung toward the front row. That's him. That's the brother. 200 pairs of eyes moved from the screen to Gregory Vance. Gregory's smooth composure held for exactly 1 second too long. That's absurd, he said. That figure is a blur. You can't identify. Same build, Eli said quietly. Same height, same way of standing with one hand in the pocket. I have spent 6 years looking at that man in that doorway, sir. I couldn't name him. Until I watched you walk across this lawn tonight and introduce yourself as her brother. He tilted his head. Funny thing about that. I pulled every record I could find on Vivian Marsh in Hartford. She didn't have a brother. Silence. Then Daniel Whitfield spoke, and he was holding up his phone. She doesn't, Daniel said. I had a firm look into both of them 8 weeks ago. There's no birth record connecting Vivian Locke to anyone named Gregory Vance. No shared parents. Nothing. He looked at his father, and his voice cracked for the first time. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't want to be right. Charles Whitfield had not moved through any of it. He stood at the altar in his tuxedo, staring at the 12-foot photograph, at the dead man in the chair, at the brooch on the screen, and the same brooch on his bride's chest, 2 feet from his own hand. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet, the microphone barely caught it. Vivian, he turned to her. This brooch. He reached out, not touching, just hovering near the sapphires. You told me it was your grandmother's. You told me her name was Eleanor. His hand began to shake. You told me a story about a porch in summer, about her hands. Vivian said nothing. Where did this come from? Charles asked, louder now, breaking. Where did it come from? The radiant bride opened her mouth, and for the first time all evening, no beautiful lie came out. Vivian Locke gathered herself the way she always did at the edge of disaster, fast, smooth, recalculating. It's a forgery, she said, and her voice steadied into something cold and reasonable. All of it. A bitter old man buries his son and needs someone to blame, so he builds a story over 6 years and crashes a wedding with a doctored photo. She turned to the crowd, hands open, appealing. Think about it. No police, no badge, no proof. Just a picture a valet claims is real, and a brooch that, yes, it's antique. Charles I bought it at auction. I never said it was stolen. You said it was your grandmother's, Charles said. She stopped. Eli stepped forward. May I see the brooch, Mr. Whitfield? You will not touch her, Gregory snapped, moving between them. Then you turn it over, Eli said to Charles, calm as still water. You, the back of the clasp. There's an engraving. Read it out loud in front of all these people, and if I'm a liar, I'll walk out of here, and you'll never see me again. Charles looked at the woman he loved. Then he reached out with trembling fingers and turned the brooch on her chest. She didn't stop him. There was no version of stopping him that didn't look worse. Charles squinted at the tiny letters in the candlelight, and the whole tent heard his voice break apart word by word. To Eleanor, he read, 1971. The folder under Eli's arm came open. He held up the police inventory sheet, 6 years old, the stolen property report. Eleanor Bishop. The brooch reported missing from Arthur Bishop's estate the morning after he died. Engraving on the clasp, to Eleanor, 1971. It matched. Everyone could see it matched. Gregory Vance moved. It was small, a half step, a hand closing around Vivian's elbow, a murmured, "We're leaving now." The instinct of a man who had survived this long by knowing exactly when a thing was over. And Vivian, for the first and only time in 15 careful years, made the mistake that vanity and fear make together. "No," she said sharply, yanking her arm from his grip in front of 200 witnesses. "Sit down, Greg. Don't you dare run and leave me holding this." The words left her mouth before she could catch them. Greg, not Gregory, not the careful formal name siblings use. The clipped, intimate, furious Greg of two people who had been partners in everything for a very long time. The silence that followed was total. A brother does not get spoken to like that. A brother does not flinch at it the way Gregory flinched. The crowd had watched a tearful bride and her protective sibling for the last 20 minutes, and now in 3 words they watched the costume fall off both of them at once. "You're not her brother," Daniel said slowly. Gregory said nothing, which was by then an answer. And the woman who had been Vivian Locke, Vivian Marsh, Diane Calloway, Diane Royce, the woman who had buried 3 husbands and 1 innocent driver, and her own real name so many times, she'd nearly forgotten it, looked out at the ruin of the most beautiful night of her life, and stopped pretending. It happened all at once. The tears dried. The trembling stopped. The soft, wounded mouth went flat and hard. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped half an octave into something none of these people had ever heard, something that had been underneath the whole time. "You stupid, sentimental old man," she said to Eli, and even now it wasn't fear, it was contempt. "Do you have any idea how long I—" She caught herself. Too late. The crowd had heard the "I." Eli Grant did not flinch. He had waited 6 years for this exact moment, and he found now that it was here, that he was perfectly calm. "You're the woman in the photograph," he said. "Prove it," she spat. "I just did." He took 1 step closer, and his voice gentled into something almost unbearable. "But that's not the part I came for. I came to ask you 1 question, and I'd like the truth because you've already lost everything else." He looked at her. "Marcus Grant, the driver, the boy you let them bury for what you did, the boy who died in a cell for your brooch." His voice did not rise. "Do you even remember his name?" For 1 second, something crossed her face. Not guilt. Eli knew guilt. And this wasn't it, but recognition, the dawning understanding of who exactly this old valet was and what she had taken from him. "He was your son," she said softly, wondering. "The driver. He was yours. He was mine." And Vivian Locke smiled, a small, terrible, honest smile, and that smile told 200 witnesses everything the photograph could not. A side door of the tent opened. A woman in a charcoal blazer stepped through, badge already out, 2 uniformed officers behind her. Detective Karen Foss had been a guest at Table 19, an old friend of the Whitfield family, until 8 minutes ago, when Daniel had texted her under the table a single word, "Come." "Diane Royce," Detective Foss said, reading from her phone as she crossed the marble. "Also known as Vivian Locke, Vivian Marsh, Diane Calloway. We're going to need to talk about Arthur Bishop and a few others." She nodded at Gregory. "Both of you." The handcuffs came out, and Eli Grant, 71 years old, in a valet's vest, 2 shades too faded for a room this rich, watched the woman who had destroyed his son, finally taken into custody, and felt his knees give and went down slowly to the cold marble floor. For the first time in 6 years, the old man covered his face with both hands and wept. The investigation that followed unspooled like thread from a dropped spool faster and farther than anyone expected. Arthur Bishop's body was exhumed within 3 weeks. The new toxicology tests that hadn't existed or hadn't been ordered 6 years earlier found traces of a compound that stops a heart and leaves almost nothing behind. Almost. The Scottsdale developer's case was reopened. So was a third in Atlanta. 3 exhumations, 3 quiet, patient murders, finally dragged into the light by 1 photograph and 1 old man who would not stop. Gregory Vance. It turned out had a real name too, and a law license suspended in 2 states, and a bank trail that wound through both their lives like a vine. He had been the architect of the paperwork every time the trusts, the transfers, the forged provenance on a stolen brooch. He took a deal to testify against her. It did not save him much, but the case that mattered most to Eli Grant was the smallest one. 6 weeks after the wedding that never happened, a judge in Hartford County signed an order vacating the conviction of Marcus Grant. Posthumous exoneration. The theft charge dismissed. The manslaughter dismissed. The record wiped clean, and in its place 3 words entered into the official file: factually innocent. Marcus had been 29 years old. He had died in a cell for a brooch he never touched, and a murder he tried to report. Now, 6 years late, the state of Connecticut admitted it on paper. Eli sat alone in the courtroom when the order was read. He did not weep this time. He just nodded slowly, the way you nod when something heavy you've carried for a very long time is finally set down. Vivian Locke's trial lasted 9 weeks. The photograph was Exhibit 1. Eli Grant took the witness stand, the box he'd stood beside 4,000 times in his career, now sitting in it himself, and he explained in the same calm voice what a true image proves. The jury was out for less than a day. 3 counts of murder. Guilty on all. Life without the possibility of parole. She showed nothing when the verdict was read, the same flat, beautiful, empty face she'd worn at the altar. Gregory got 30 years, and Charles Whitfield, who had come within 90 seconds of marrying the woman who planned to bury him, did 3 things. First, he stood on the steps of the courthouse in front of every camera in the state and said the words plainly that he had been a fool, that an old man he'd been ready to throw out of his own home had saved his life, and that the name of that man was Eli Grant, and the name people should remember was Marcus. Second, with Daniel beside him, he founded the Marcus Grant Foundation, funding legal defense and forensic review for the wrongfully convicted, with a focus on the cases. Nobody re-examines the defendants. Nobody believes the easiest faces in the room to blame. Third, he wrote Eli a check large enough to erase 6 years of sold cars and shrinking rooms and a spent pension. Eli handed it back. "I didn't do this for money, Mr. Whitfield," he said. "I did it for my boy." "Then let me do something," Charles said. "Anything. Name it." Eli was quiet for a long moment. "There's a wall in the lobby of your building," he finally said. "Downtown. I saw it in a magazine once when I was tracking her. All those portraits of important people who made the Whitfield Group what it is." He looked up. "Put my son there. Marcus. In his uniform, he was so proud of that uniform. Put him on that wall where the important people are, so nobody who walks through there ever again thinks the man in the driver's seat doesn't matter." Charles Whitfield's eyes filled. "It's the first thing they'll see," he said. "It hangs there now. A young man, 29, in a pressed, dark suit, smiling like he has his whole life in front of him. A small brass plate beneath it reads, Marcus Grant. He saw the truth, and he told it, and they didn't listen. We listen now. Eli Grant never moved into a bigger place. He didn't want one. He went home to his single room in Providence, and he set Marcus's exoneration order on the table next to the photograph of his son, and he sat down in the quiet. He took out the creased picture he had carried for 6 years, the one that had ended a murderer at an altar in front of 200 people. He didn't need to carry it anymore. He laid it flat on the table beside his boy's face, and he smoothed it once with his thumb. "I told you, son," he said softly to the small, dark room. "I told you they'd hear you. It took me a while." His voice caught. "But they heard you. The whole world heard you." Outside, the streetlights came on. An old man sat alone with a photograph and a name finally cleared, And for the first time in 6 years, Eli Grant was not hunting anything. He was just a father at peace, who had kept his promise. This was never about a photograph. It was about who we decide is worth listening to, and who we wave away because of their age, their uniform, or the color of their skin. The truth doesn't care who's holding it. Dignity was never something you could see from across a room. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and who in your life saw the truth when no one else would subscribe and stay with us, because the next voice nobody listens to might be the one that saves everything.